Parallelogram continued. Adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Here you can see parallelogram ABCD. Measure of angle A is equal to 100 degrees. Measure of angle B is equal to 180 degrees. Measure of angle C is equal to 100 degrees. And measure of angle D is equal to 80 degrees. Now, measure of angle A plus measure of angle B is equal to 100 degrees plus 80 degrees, that is equal to 180 degrees. Similarly, measure of angle B plus measure of angle C is equal to 80 degrees plus 100 degrees, that is equal to 180 degrees. Similarly, measure of angle C plus measure of angle D is equal to 100 degrees plus 80 degrees, that is equal to 180 degrees. Similarly, we have measure of angle D plus measure of angle A is equal to 80 degrees plus 100 degrees, that is equal to 180 degrees. So we get the adjacent angles of a parallelogram to be supplementary. That is, sum of the measures of the adjacent angles of a parallelogram is equal to 180 degrees. In other words, we say adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. We know that A and B are adjacent angles of this parallelogram. Similarly, B and C are the adjacent angles of this parallelogram. C and D are adjacent angles of this parallelogram. D and A are adjacent angles of this parallelogram. We found out that the sum of the measures of the adjacent angles to be 180 degrees. Therefore, in other words, we can say that as adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. The adjacent angles add up to 180 degrees. Here, two adjacent angles are shown in order to say what is the meaning of adjacent angles. Parallelogram is a quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel. A quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel is a parallelogram. In a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Diagonals bisect each other. Previously, we learned that adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Now, three more properties you have to keep in mind. One is opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Please remember this. It will be very useful for solving problems. When you solve problems, you have to apply all these properties. First one, I taught you that adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So once again, let us repeat the property together. Say along with me. Adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Let us see this activity. You can also do this at home. Cut out a parallelogram from a sheet of paper and cut it along a diagonal. Here we have named the parallelogram as ABCD. So the diagonal which is shown here is AC. So cut out a parallelogram ABCD from a sheet of paper and cut it along the diagonal AC. Now we obtain two triangles. What can we say about these triangles? Place one triangle over the other. Turn one round. We observe that the two triangles are congruent to each other because they exactly fit over each other. They exactly overlap. Thus we can say that a diagonal of a parallelogram divides it into two congruent triangles. A diagonal of a parallelogram divides it into two congruent triangles. Now, let us make a recap. The last class onwards we have learned some properties of parallelogram. So we can make a recap. A diagonal of a parallelogram divides it into two congruent triangles. In a parallelogram, opposite sides are equal. Otherwise, it is said that opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. If each pair of opposite sides of quadrilateral is equal, then it is a parallelogram. Once again I repeat, if each pair of opposite sides of a quadrilateral is equal, then it is a parallelogram. Now coming to the fourth one. In a parallelogram, opposite angles are equal. Otherwise, it is said to be opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Now, coming to the fifth one. If in a quadrilateral, each pair of opposite angles is equal, then it is a parallelogram. If in a quadrilateral, each pair of opposite angles is equal, then it is a parallelogram. Now coming to the sixth one. The diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Coming to the last one. If the diagonals of a quadrilateral bisect each other, then it is a parallelogram. Once again I repeat. If the diagonals of a quadrilateral bisect each other, then it is a parallelogram. Now, once again we repeat the properties. First one, opposite sides are parallel. Second one, opposite sides are congruent. Third one, opposite angles are congruent. Fourth one, consecutive angles are supplementary. Adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. It is otherwise mentioned as consecutive angles. Adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. The diagonals bisect each other. Now, theorems, ways to prove. You may get some theorems and you will have to prove it. These points will help you. If both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, then it is a parallelogram. If both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, then it is a parallelogram. If the diagonals bisect each other, then it is a parallelogram. If both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, then it is a parallelogram. If one pair of sides are congruent and parallel, then it is a parallelogram. Once again I repeat. If both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, then it is a parallelogram. If both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, then it is a parallelogram. If the diagonals bisect each other, then it is a parallelogram. If both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, then it is a parallelogram. If one pair of sides are congruent and parallel, then it is a parallelogram. If one angle in a parallelogram is a right angle, then all four angles are right angles. This gives us right triangles also. If one angle in a parallelogram is a right angle, then all four angles are right angles. This gives us right triangles also. Everyday parallelograms. We can see the shapes of parallelograms in our daily life. This is a modern day skyscraper at MIT. The openings and windows are all made up of parallelograms. Much of them are rectangles and squares. This is a parallelogram kind of building. The circled part of the Kirby building in Dallas, Texas is a parallelogram. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. Here are some parallelograms that occur in real life. You can see some parallelograms that occur in real life in this picture. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. An example would be the railing of the stairs at the natatorium. Solved examples. Example 1. Quadrilateral PQRS is a parallelogram. PQ is equal to 3.5. PS is equal to 5.3. Measure of angle Q is equal to 50 degrees. Then find the lengths of remaining sides and measures of remaining angles. So you have to draw the figure. Draw a parallelogram PQRS. Mark PQ as 3.5, length of PS as 5.3 and measure of angle Q as 50 degrees in the figure. Now we have to find the lengths of the remaining sides and measures of remaining angles. You have to find the lengths of the remaining sides. You have to find length of QR and length of SR. Also you have to find the measures of remaining angles. You have to find out the measure of angle P, measure of angle S and measure of angle R. You are given a parallelogram PQRS. So quadrilateral PQRS is a parallelogram. Within brackets you write given. Now look at the figure. PQRS is a parallelogram. So we have PS parallel to QR. The side PS is parallel to side QR. And let us take PQ to be the transversal. Then you get angle P and angle Q to be interior angles. You all know that interior angles are supplementary. That means the sum of the measures of the interior angles is 180 degrees. So here measure of angle Q plus measure of angle P is equal to to 180 degrees. Now substitute the value of measure of angle Q. It is given to be 50 degrees. So 50 degrees plus measure of angle P is equal to 180 degrees. You have to find the value of measure of angle P. Keep measure of angle P to one side. Take the numbers to the other side. Already you have 180 in the right hand side. You are going to take 50 degrees from the left hand side to the right hand side. So plus becomes minus. So the operation changes. Plus becomes minus. So now on the right hand side we have 180 minus 50 degrees, which is otherwise equal to 130 degrees. Therefore, measure of angle P is equal to 130 degrees. Now, we know that the opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So, measure of angle P is equal to measure of angle R and measure of angle Q is equal to measure of angle S. Look at the figure. P and R are, angle P and angle R are opposite angles. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Similarly, angle Q and angle S are opposite angles of a parallelogram. We know that opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So their measures are equal. So measure of angle P is equal to measure of angle R and measure of angle Q is equal to measure of angle S. Therefore, measure of angle R is equal to 130 degrees because we have already found out measure of angle P is equal to 130 degrees. So this first equation measure of angle P is equal to measure of angle R will become measure of angle R is equal to 130 degrees. And you all know that measure of angle Q is equal to 50 degrees is given. So measure of angle S will be equal to 50 degrees because measure of angle S is equal to measure of angle Q, but measure of angle Q is equal to 50 degrees. So measure of angle S is equal to 50 degrees. Similarly, opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. PS and QR are opposite sides. Similarly, PQ and SR are opposite sides. So PS is equal to QR and PQ is equal to SR. Within brackets you write opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. We all know that PS is equal to 5.3 is given. Therefore QR will become equal to 5.3 because QR is equal to PS. That PS is equal to 5.3. So QR is equal to 5.3 and SR is equal to 3.5. Why? PQ is going to be equal to 3.5. You all know SR is equal to PQ. That PQ is equal to 3.5. So SR becomes equal to 3.5. Now we have found out the lengths of the remaining sides and measures of the remaining angles. Finally, you have to write it in the format of answer. Answer QR is equal to 5.3, SR is equal to 3.5, measure of angle R is equal to 130 degrees, measure of angle S is equal to 50 degrees and measure of angle P is equal to 130 degrees. Now let us go to the next problem. Example 2. Quadrilateral ABCD is a parallelogram. If measure of angle A is equal to 4x plus 13 degrees and measure of angle D is equal to 5x minus 22 degrees, then find the measures of angle B and angle C. So draw this parallelogram ABCD. Mark whatever is given. Measure of angle A is equal to 4x plus 13 degrees Adjacent angles of a parallelogram are supplementary, so sum of the measures of the adjacent angles is 180 degrees. Therefore, measure of angle A plus measure of angle B is equal to 180 degrees. Now substitute the values of measure of angle A and measure of angle B here. You get 4x plus 13 degrees plus 5x minus 22 degrees is equal to 180 degrees. Therefore, 4x plus 5x is equal to, now remove all the brackets here because everything is addition, subtraction, remove all the brackets here. 4x plus 5x will become 9x plus 13 and minus 22. You know the rules for integers. If two numbers are having different signs, find out the difference between the numbers and put the sign of the greater number. Difference between 22 and 13 is 9 and the sign of the greater number is minus. So we get minus 9. So we are getting 9x minus 9 is equal to 180. Keep 9x on one side because we have to ultimately find out the value of x. So keep 9x on one side. Take the number to the other side. Minus 9 becomes plus 9 when it is taken to the other side of the equal to sign. So 180 plus 9 will become 189. Now find out the value of x. 9 multiplied by x is equal to 189. Therefore, x is equal to 189 upon 9. Multiplication becomes division when it is going to the other side of the equal to sign. 189 upon 9 is otherwise 21. Therefore, we got the value of x to be 21. Now substitute this in measure of angle A and measure of angle B. Measure of angle A is given to be 4x plus 13 degrees. Instead of x there, you have to put the value 21. So it will become 4 multiplied by 21 plus 13. 4 multiplied by 21 is otherwise 84 plus 13. That will be 97 degrees. Now measure of angle A is equal to 97 degrees. You know that measure of angle C is equal to measure of angle A because they are opposite angles of a parallelogram. Opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Therefore, measure of angle C also will become 97 degrees. Here the reason is not written. You have to write the reason there. Measure of angle C is equal to 97 degrees because within brackets you write since the opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Now coming to the next one, measure of angle D. Measure of angle D is equal to 5x minus 22. Put the value of x over there. X is equal to 21. So substitute the value of x in 5x minus 22. You will be getting 5 multiplied by 21 minus 22. 5 multiplied by 21 is 105 minus 22. 105 minus 22 is 83 degrees. Therefore, measure of angle D is equal to 83 degrees. Now, you have to find measure of angle B. Measure of angle D is equal to measure of angle B because angle B and angle D are opposite angles of a parallelogram. You all know that opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Therefore, measure of angle B is equal to 83 degrees. Within brackets you write the reason since opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Now finally you have to write answer. Measure of angle B is equal to 83 degrees and measure of angle C is equal to 97 degrees. And whenever such problems are given, you have to write given, to find and then solution. I have taught you so many problems like that. So now you can write. First, how will you start to write this problem? First you write given quadrilateral ABCD is a parallelogram. Measure of angle A is equal to 4x plus 13 degrees and measure of angle D is equal to 5x minus 22 degrees. To find, put the heading as to find measure of angle B and measure of angle C. Like this you have to start this problem. Then write the solution. Then finally you have to write the answer. Here you have to read the question properly. What is asked, that only has to be written as answer. So you are asked to find measures of angle B and angle C. So you have to write the answer as measure of angle B is equal to 83 degrees and measure of angle